You're watching UATV News. My name is Inna Kosinska. Good evening. Slovakia supports Ukraine's European aspirations. President of the Slovak Republic, Zuzana Chaputova, will participate in the summit of the Crimean Platform in August this year. This was announced by Prime Minister of Slovakia, Eduard Heger, at a meeting with the Ukraine's Prime Minister, Denis Shmyhal, on May 28. According to Heger, Bratislava considers the reform process in Ukraine to be sustainable and successful.
Slovakia is interested to have a stable and independent neighbor, that is Ukraine. I believe that this is not only my wish, all our citizens want it. Slovakia fully supports the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ukraine and its Euro-Atlantic ambitions. And we also support the reforms that are being carried out in Ukraine. They are making you stronger.
Starting May 26, air traffic between Ukraine and Belarus stopped. And since May 29, Ukraine closes its sky to all Belarusian planes. A ban on flights between countries and transit flights was introduced by the Cabinet of Ministers of Ukraine. These are forced measures to ensure the safety of citizens and aircraft, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine, Dmytro Kuleba, explained. The ban of flights between the countries is linked to the forced landing of a Ryanair flight in Minsk on May 23 and detention of the Belarusian opposition journalist Roman Protasevich.
We should take care of the safety of citizens. We cannot even imagine what could the hostile special services invent against our compatriots. Therefore, we have to protect them. This decision will also lead to the increase in the profits of Ukraine, because the airlines of the European Union and other countries of the world, which previously flew over Belarus and paid the corresponding funds to the budget, now fly through Ukraine and accordingly pay the corresponding funds to our state.
This week, Ukraine has also stopped importing electricity from Belarus and Russia. This was announced by the Prime Minister. This decision was made on the initiative of the Ministry of Energy. Valery Tarysyuk, chairman of the National Commission for State Regulation of Energy and Utilities, said that the import ban would be in effect until October 1st. Whether they will extend the ban or not, this will depend on the situation with energy resources before the beginning of the autumn-winter period, when electricity consumption in Ukraine increases.
We also think about the consumers and about the theoretical possibility of both abuse and manipulation in the market because of stopping of imports. We have to monitor the state of readiness for the autumn-winter period, whether the coal reserves are enough. We see that last winter the import of electricity was necessary.
Presence of the Russian military is regularly fixed in 3 areas along the contact line in eastern Ukraine. These are areas near Stanitsa Luhanska, Zolote and Petrovsky, the Joint Forces Operations Headquarters informs. Ceasefire along the contact line is the main task for Ukraine. Both the participants of the trilateral contact group and representatives of the EU note. How real are the prospects? Our correspondent found out.
Head of the Ukrainian delegation to the Trilateral Contact Group, Leonid Kravchuk, suggests to change the place for negotiations on resolving the situation in Donbas to Switzerland or Finland. According to him, Belarus became absolutely unsuitable as a platform for constructive dialogue because of the totalitarian regime. Besides, Russia continues blocking the conversation about a complete ceasefire along the contact line.
We set the task to ceasefire. All sides, including Russia, are calling for a ceasefire, but the real situation is that they absolutely do not want. This is understandable to ceasefire, and they are doing everything to slow down, stop, block the adoption of a specific decision. Russia insists on one thing, that separate area of the Donetsk and Luhansk regions should act as a party of the conflict. However, they are a mechanism in the hands of Kremlin. It's obvious.
Earlier, Leonid Kravchuk met with OSCE Secretary-General Helga Schmidt. The meeting was chaired by the head of the President's office, Andriy Yermak. On Friday, Ms. Schmidt has also visited the contact line in Donetsk and Luhansk regions, where shelling by illegal armed groups is still continuing. The fact that the Minsk format of negotiations does not work and the Kremlin is doing everything to paralyze it was also stated by the leader of the German party Alliance 90, the Green, Robert Gabeck, during his visit to Kyiv.
Agreement and the Normandy format was a tremendous success at the time arranged. The solution for the war could only be found diplomatically. Right now we have to admit that all diplomatic efforts are blocked, my point of view, blocked by Russia. So right now it's very hard to see how in a near-time diplomatic efforts can bring peace to Ukraine, to Donbass, and that the shooting will be stopped.
President of the European Commission Ursula von der Leyen affirmed the continued support of the European Union in the issue of the territorial integrity of Ukraine. In a telephone conversation with President of Ukraine Volodymyr Zelensky, she also announced support for Ukraine's territorial integrity and reforms, and also said about new financial assistance from Brussels.
We announced new aid worth 25.4 million euros to help people suffering from the conflict.
One of the reforms approved by the world community was the recent adoption in Ukraine of a draft law that provides for criminal prosecution without statute of limitations for war crimes, genocide and crimes against humanity.
Люди, які зараз на окупованих територіях,
People who are now committing these crimes in the occupied territories, for some reasons, think that they go unpunished. The situation is changing. 10, 20, 30 years have passed, and there are examples when not only regular criminals, but even the dictators were brought to responsibility.
Thus, neither geography nor the citizenship of the victim or the offender will no longer become obstacle to the investigation. The authors of the document are confident that the new law will help solve thousands of crimes in the occupied Crimea and in those parts of Donbass that are temporarily uncontrolled by Ukraine. Reported by Vadim Kramer and Yulia Hranovska, UATV News.
Ukrainian military have conducted artillery training near the occupied Crimea. This was informed by the commander of the Joint Forces of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, Serhiy Nayev. According to legend, the large-caliber cannon unit should have repelled the attack of the enemy's amphibious assault. During maneuvers, the crews changed positions and targets were determined with the use of drones.
Artillery reconnaissance launched the unmanned aerial vehicles, which carried out reconnaissance of conventional enemy targets and the transfer of coordination of targets to the firing batteries. After the deployment of the combat positions, the artillery units moved to other areas of the fire positions, successfully performing several fire tasks. This training showed that the artillerymen are ready to perform combat missions.
Ukraine and the international community should force Russia to provide access for monitoring and humanitarian missions to the occupied Crimea and separate areas of Donetsk and Luhansk regions. This was stated by the Vice Prime Minister of Ukraine, Minister for Reintegration of the temporarily occupied territories, Oleksiy Reznikov. Earlier in Brussels, he met with the EU Special Representative for Human Rights, Eamon Gilmore. At the meeting, they discussed the problems with the violation of human rights in the territories uncontrolled by Ukraine.
The local population of the occupied Donetsk and Luhansk regions and the Crimean Peninsula is facing breaking of connections with Ukraine. In addition to the fact that the free movement of citizens across the contact line and the administrative border is blocked, the occupation regimes continue blocking the access of the UN agency, the International Committee of the Red Cross, and the USCESMM to the territories uncontrolled by the government of Ukraine, including to places of detention of prisoners who are in inhumane conditions.
55% of Ukrainians want safe reunification with the territories temporarily uncontrolled by Ukraine. 58% of the respondents believe that elections in certain areas of Donetsk and Luhansk regions can take place only after Ukraine regains control over these territories. These are the data by the National Platform for Dialogue for Peace and Safe Reintegration. More information about the research results in the following report.
To restore control over territories, maintain and build new relationships, the majority of Ukrainians are ready to interact with residents of the temporarily occupied territories.
I believe that relations with representatives of the Crimea and the occupied Donbass should be maintained, but under the Ukrainian banner, under Ukrainian flag. We have to find common points that connect us. This is Ukrainian future, our common Ukrainian future.
People are not guilty of what is happening. Most of the people who stay there are normal and adequate. I have a lot of friends there.
I think they need more support. There is shooting there. The stress is enormous. We have to support them against all odds.
According to the survey held on the request of the National Platform for Dialogue on Peace and Safe Reintegration, only 20% of the respondents would not agree to any compromise.
People who relate to the discourse of the wall are to blame. They blame the occupied territories. They believe that nothing will ever change. And it was all different from the beginning. This is a rather marginal niche. 55% support safe reintegration, and only 20% say that there cannot be compromise. We stand for peace based on the principles of safe reintegration. This means that we cannot seek to restore the territorial integrity of the country at the expense of creating a risk to the sovereignty and country's independence.
Bringing back of the passenger bus connection with separate areas of Donetsk and Luhansk regions and the occupied Crimea is supported by 62% of the respondents. The simplification of procedures for the legalization of documents are supported by 60%, and half of the respondents support preferential admission of applicants to universities.
These indicators mean that for the majority of our citizens, both in the center, in the east and in the north, people who live in the temporarily occupied territories remain their fellow compatriots, even in spite of 7 years of efforts by the Russian Federation to limit contacts between people.
Experts stress in order to reunite the state safely, there is no need to force things. It takes time to overcome distrust in society. The best thing that can be done today is to develop the infrastructure of the controlled territories of Donetsk and Luhansk regions as quickly as possible. Reported by Vadim Kramer and Yulia Bardish, UATV News.
2.5 million Ukrainians remain in Crimea now, and Russia turns the occupied peninsula into a military base. And very few Crimeans do know what is really going on there. According to First Deputy Minister for Foreign Affairs of Ukraine, Emina Japarova, the main weapon of Ukraine in the fight against Russian propaganda is constant informing both the Crimeans and the world community about the real situation on the occupied peninsula. Dozens of countries are now talking about what is the Crimea now, how does it live, how do people feel there. Russia continue forming some other media reality with sweets and unicorns, so to say. Namely, they are talking about construction of roads, some objects of infrastructure, etc. And yes, they are built, but for what purposes? We should tell everyone firmly, those are military purposes. 12 free TV broadcasting across the entire country. The State MultiPlex system will be created in Ukraine. This project is planned to play a key role in the information confrontation with Russia. So when will the national digital TV network start working? Our correspondents know.
By the end of the year, residents of almost all the regions of Ukraine will be able to watch at least 12 free digital TV channels. State digital TV broadcasting will bring the Ukrainian channels to the territory controlled by the government, including areas bordering with Russia and the temporarily occupied territories. Residents of these regions are the most exposed to information propaganda from Russia.
The state should protect its information space, both in the area of joint forces operation and in the temporarily occupied territories. So I welcome this event, which finally took place.
At present, the only digital TV operator in Ukraine is a private company. It broadcasts up to 70% of the country's territory. The State MultiPlex's range will allow signal transmission over long distances, up to 30 kilometers. The state concern for radio broadcasting, radio communication and television has been appointed operator.
The State Center for Radio Frequencies issued us conclusions on 158 settlements. The coverage is not preciously registered, but we understand that there is a task to provide broadcasting to 95% of the territory of Ukraine.
State and public broadcasters will have a certain access to the national multiplex. Commercial channels will be admitted to broadcasting based on a competition by the National Council for Television and Radio Broadcasting.
We understand that the share of broadcasting is decreasing. Other platforms are in trend. Many people use the satellite cables. Nevertheless, this is a very important decision of the state.
In order to implement the project, a loan will be issued by the Ukrainian State Bank under a state guarantee for a period of 7 years. One will be able to connect to the national multiplex already at the beginning of 2022. Reported by Vadim Kramer and Yulia Hranovska, UATV News.
A new batch of 500,000 doses of the Chinese CoronaVac vaccine was delivered to Ukraine on May 26. The vaccine came in single-dose vials, the health ministry said. To be completely immunized against COVID-19, one should receive 2 doses, with an interval of 28 days. Earlier, Ukraine has also received 1,200,000 doses of CoronaVac. Vaccination with this drug started here on April 13. Besides, on May 26, the first batch of 117,000 doses of Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine that were purchased at the expense of the state budget have also arrived to Kyiv. It will be used to vaccinate teachers, medical workers, military personnel and diplomats. The epidemic situation in Ukraine is stabilizing. As of May 28, 3,306 cases of COVID-19 were recorded. Most of them are in Kyiv, Dnipropetrovsk and Lviv regions. Besides, in June, the city of Uzhhorod in western Ukraine plans to close the department for patients with COVID-19 in the city clinical hospital. Out of 190 beds, only 10 are occupied there. In general, 6 regions and the capital partially correspond to the conditions of the green quarantine zone. The key document for the land market was signed by President Volodymyr Zelensky on May 24th at the Ukraine 30 Land Forum. This law should come into force on July 1st. It will transfer state lands to the ownership on territorial communities. The next step is to find plots illegally taken out of the state ownership and add them to the general cadastre. According to President, the area of the allotments that is the shade is now equal to 2 territories of the Crimean peninsulas. The access to such information will be made public.
This is a law that removes the function of formalizing the right to land from an official who has never seen it in his life. This law would become a kind of land constitution for our country.
In order to manage the lands effectively after the market starts working, the government recommends, first of all, to form a database of all land plots and determine the functional purpose of the territories. Land inventory will allow communities to offer businesses and investors the best locations for activities and stimulate true competition. This, in turn, will allow creation of new jobs and development of infrastructure. In some 3-5 years after the opening of the market, land will become at least twice as expensive, they say in the government. Therefore, the introduction of electronic auctions is also very important.
The successful experience of holding auctions in previous years shows that the average rate of completion of such auctions can be 18% of the normative monetary value of land. That is, the potential for increasing revenues to local budgets and communities due to effective management of land resources could make up to $430 million.
An open portal of land data has also been launched in Ukraine. One can find the information about the allotments of the national, regional and local levels. Various data from 75 territorial communities has already been listed there. The geoportal works in real time. The information has been constantly updated. The government promises to enter all the relevant data from all across the country as soon as possible.
Undoubtedly, this means publicity and transparency of the state information. This will give a serious impetus to the improvement of public control of the regulation of all procedures. The search service works in real time. There is an analysis of viewing data and use of data in the form of electronic maps.
Education and science would become the topic for the next discussions in the frameworks of the Ukraine 30 Forum. They will start on May 31st. An affordable housing loan for internally displaced people is working in Ukraine. It's a mortgage program at 3% for Ukrainians from Crimea and Donbas who had to leave their homes. More than 2,000 people have already submitted applications. In order to receive a preferential loan, it is enough to submit an online application via DIA electronic portal. Most of the required data is recorded by the system automatically. More details in the following report.
The mortgage program at 3% for internally displaced persons from Crimea and Donbas was launched in Ukraine on May the 17th. The project is financed by the German State Bank. The German government has allocated a grant of 25.5 million euros. One can submit an application in 2 ways. The first one is to apply to the regional office of the State Fund for Assistance to Youth Housing Construction. The main documents are an application, an IDP certificate, passport, an identification code, and income statement. An applicant can choose their own accommodation. The main thing is that the house is already built. The second way is to register on the DIA portal. Using the electronic key, an applicant goes to the Housing Loan for IDPs page. In the application for the intention to receive a loan for housing, it is necessary to indicate one's personal data and select the region in which one wants to buy a flat. Then the family information. The data will appear in the registry the next day.
Pay attention to the fact that you will have to enlist both the IDP certificate and the tax number of all family members who will take part in the program. That is, if you do not enlist someone, then the calculation of square meters for which the loan is be provided will be calculated only for those family members that are in the list at the moment.
The loan will be provided for up to 20 years at 3%. The standard housing area is 21 square meters per person plus 10.5 square meters for a family. One of the conditions of the loan is the first payment of 6% of the cost of housing.
If you take an average apartment for $36,000, then you have to pay from $215 to $140 monthly. Every month the sum will decrease due to the fact that the body of the loan is gradually repaid.
In order to receive a loan at 3%, the applicant should have a positive credit history. Credits will go to those chosen by the random number generator. According to preliminary estimates, there are about 700 families. The first draw will take place on July the 16th. Reported by Vadim Kramer, Svetlana Sich and Irina Kontonistova, UATV News.
On May 25, Ukraine marked the International Missing Children Day. This is a day of mourning for those who could not be saved or who wasn't found. About 14,000 children disappear in Ukraine every year, but according to official statistics, almost all of them are found on the very first day. What should parents and relatives of the missing child know to successfully find their kid? How should one act in case a child is missing? Our correspondent found out.
Oh, how cute you are!
These are the first minutes after the volunteers found 4-year-old Amina from the Odessa region. The girl left the house last week and disappeared. 200 people were looking for her.
We went to the other district at night and the search continued until lunchtime the next day. We have found a child alive.
Volunteers track information about missing children on social networks and join the searches as well.
We make and glue the leaflets with information about the missing kids. They are put at places where children could be seen: the route buses, trolley bus stops, etc.
If a child has disappeared, it is necessary to contact the police, they stress in the Juvenile Police Department. In almost 97% of cases, children are found on the very first day.
If a child is missing, parents should contact the police immediately. Do not hesitate, do not waste time, do not hope that your kid return him or herself. There is no need to come to the police station. Just call 102 and the police officers will definitely come and start search activities.
Parents can contact the government hotline and the Children's Ombudsman for help. The information will be promptly transmitted to all the necessary bodies and services. This also applies to residents of the territories temporarily uncontrolled by Ukraine.
We cannot exclude situations when a child enters the controlled territory. Therefore, a statement on the controlled territory should be made, because you need to look for a child everywhere throughout Ukraine, regardless of the status of the territory, whether it is temporarily occupied or not.
This year, more than 4,000 families turned to the police because of the child gone missing. Fortunately, almost every kid was found. However, the destiny of 6 other kids is unknown. Their search continues. Reported by Vadim Kramer and Anna Horodentseva, UATV News.
Ukrainian feature film received an award at the Berliner Film Festival. The movie Stop Earth, directed by Katerina Hornostai, was awarded the Crystal Bear Award as the best feature film in the Generation 14+ competition program. It tells about modern teenagers and their problems, friendship, first love and growing up. The action takes place in an ordinary Kiev school, and the roles are played by non-professional teenage actors. Starting June 9, the film will be demonstrated in cinemas in Berlin. That's all for this hour. More updates on our official website, YouTube, Twitter and Facebook pages. Thank you for staying with UATV channel. Goodbye.